Hannah Thompson dropped her work bag onto the floor and reached for her textbooks. Her shoulders ached from operating machinery at the plant all morning, but she still had to review for her evening biology class. Just as she pulled out her notes, her mother stormed into the kitchen. "You need to stop wasting time with these silly dreams and focus on reality," her mother Linda snapped, slamming the textbooks onto the counter. The loud thud echoed through their small house in Little Rock, Arkansas, making Hannah flinch. "I just got home, Mom," Hannah said, trying to stay calm. Linda scoffed. "You work a good job at the plant. That should be enough for someone like you." Hannah sighed and held her book tighter. She was used to this. "Where are you watching from today? Kindly hit like, comment and subscribe to this channel for more." At 21, Hannah had spent the last 3 years juggling full-time work and part-time community college classes. She worked mornings at West Lane Manufacturing, operating heavy machinery. In the evenings and weekends she studied. Her parents, Linda and Frank Thompson, had never supported her dreams of getting a degree. From the day she graduated high school, they insisted college wasn't for her. College? Frank had laughed back then. "Sweetheart, you barely scraped by in school. You're not cut out for all that studying. You're better off doing something practical." She had believed them at first, but something inside her kept pushing. She wanted more, even if it meant doing it all in secret. So Hannah used the money from her extra shifts to enroll in community college without telling her parents. She told them she was working overtime or out with friends. Her days were long. Her hands always hurt, her back ached, and she rarely slept more than 5 hours. Still, she showed up to class every evening with a notebook full of notes and a heart full of hope. One evening, as she quietly studied at the kitchen table, her mother snatched the book out of her hands. "Biology? Are you serious?" Linda said with a laugh. "Why are you bothering with this junk?" Hannah looked up and said softly, "Because I want to help people. I want to become a nurse. Maybe even go to medical school someday." Frank lowered his newspaper and gave a bitter chuckle. "Medical school? Come on, Hannah," he said. "Let's be realistic. You barely got through high school. University is for smart kids." Hannah clenched her jaw. "I have a 3.8 GPA. Linda rolled her eyes. "That's community college. It doesn't count. Real colleges are harder. You'll end up dropping out and wasting everyone's time and money." Hannah stood up, holding her books. "I'm not asking you for money. I'm doing this on my own." Frank shook his head. "We're just trying to protect you. People like us don't get fancy degrees. We work hard. That's how it's always been." Hannah walked back to her room and shut the door quietly. She leaned against it for a moment, staring at the floor. Something didn't feel right. Her parents weren't just discouraging her. They were doing everything they could to convince her she couldn't succeed. Growing up, she'd always been told they struggled with money. Frank worked at a warehouse and Linda was a receptionist at a local dental office. They didn't live fancy, but they weren't poor either. So every time she mentioned school, they made excuses. "Education costs too much," Linda would say. "We've got bills to pay. Your father needs to think about retirement." But deep down, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more they weren't telling her. The only person who ever truly encouraged Hannah's dreams was her grandfather, Mr. Arthur Thompson. He had worked as an engineer for over 30 years before retiring, and he always said education was the key to a better life. During family gatherings, he would pull Hannah aside and ask, "How are your classes, sweetheart? Are you keeping those grades up?" Hannah would nod, grateful that someone believed in her. "I wish your grandmother and I had more chances when we were young," he'd say. "But you still have time. Don't let anyone take that away from you." But her parents didn't like those conversations. Whenever Grandpa Arthur talked about college, Linda and Frank would quickly change the subject or excuse themselves from the room. Hannah began to notice the strange looks her parents shared whenever education came up. It was subtle, but it felt like they were hiding something. Then there was her cousin Brian. They were the same age, but Brian had gone straight to university after high school. At every family gathering, Brian talked about his internships, professors, and plans for graduate school. Her parents would smile politely and say, "That's great, Brian. You're built for that kind of life." Then they'd glance at Hannah and add, "Some people are just more hands-on, like our Hannah. She's practical." The words always stung. What hurt even more was overhearing her mother once tell Aunt Mary, "Hannah's just not motivated like Brian. She's comfortable working at the plant." It wasn't comfort. It was survival. Hannah worked double shifts to pay rent, gave her parents money every month to help with bills, and stretched her remaining funds to cover gas, food, and tuition. She lived on instant noodles, bought second-hand books, and wore the same work boots until the soles nearly peeled off. Still, she never complained. She just kept pushing forward. The hardest part wasn't the exhaustion or the empty wallet. It was how invisible her effort seemed to the people who were supposed to support her the most. No one at home ever asked about her grades. No one celebrated when she passed a hard class. She felt like she was living a secret life, one that only she believed in. Then came a quiet Sunday afternoon in November. Hannah was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing her anatomy flashcards when she heard a car pull into the driveway. She peeked out the window and smiled. It was Grandpa Arthur's old blue sedan. "Grandpa," she said, opening the door with a grin. "I didn't know you were coming by." He stepped in holding a small bag of snacks and a warm smile. "Thought I'd stop in and check on my favorite student." Before Hannah could answer, her parents came in from the living room. Frank's face stiffened. Linda smiled tightly. "Dad, what brings you over today?" Grandpa Arthur looked at Hannah, his eyes kind and proud. "I was just thinking about that education fund I set up for you a few years ago," he said cheerfully. "Figured I'd check how it's helping with your tuition." The air froze. Hannah blinked, confused. "What education fund?" Arthur looked between her and her parents, suddenly frowning. "The college fund. I gave your parents $15,000 to cover your university costs. I assumed you were using it." The color drained from Linda's face. Frank shifted uncomfortably. I never knew about any fund," Hannah said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was so sharp, it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Grandpa Arthur's cheerful expression turned into a deep frown. He turned to Frank and Linda with a sharp tone Hannah had never heard from him before. "Where's the money I gave you for Hannah's education?" he asked slowly. Frank opened his mouth, but no words came. Linda reached for a nearby chair and sat down quickly. "Dad, we were going to tell her," Linda said weakly. "Tell me what?" Hannah asked, stepping closer. "I've been working nonstop to pay for school. Eating ramen. Skipping meals. Buying used books. You told me we couldn't afford college." "I thought you weren't serious," Frank mumbled. "You never brought up university again after high school." "I didn't because you convinced me I was too stupid," Hannah shouted, tears forming in her eyes. Arthur's face darkened with fury. "You told me she didn't want to go. You said she was happy working full-time." Frank swallowed hard. "We thought, maybe it was better to invest the money. We were going to grow it until she was ready." "Invest?" Hannah repeated. "What does that even mean?" "We had some car repairs last year," Linda admitted. "And the roof needed fixing. We used part of the money just temporarily." Arthur slammed his palm on the table. "I told you that money was for her. Not for cars. Not for repairs. I opened that account specifically for Hannah's education." Hannah looked at her parents in disbelief. "So while I was killing myself to afford community college, you were sitting on $15,000 meant for me?" Neither parent answered. Arthur stood up slowly. "I want to see the account statements," he said. "Right now." Linda hesitated. "It's not exactly in one place. Some of it was moved around." "Moved where?" Arthur asked, his voice now cold. Frank cleared his throat. "Some of it went into a mutual fund. The rest, we used to pay off a few debts. But we were going to repay it." "You forged her future into your budget." Arthur snapped. "You lied to your own daughter for years." Hannah's voice was trembling, but she stood tall. "You told me I wasn't college material. You made me feel worthless. You did all of that just to cover up that you spent the money." Arthur looked at her with pride. "Don't worry, sweetheart. This isn't over." The conversation exploded from there. Arthur demanded every financial document related to the education fund. Frank and Linda scrambled to explain, offering weak excuses and nervous apologies. Hannah sat quietly at the kitchen table, listening with clenched fists. Her entire world had shifted in less than 10 minutes. "I trusted you," Arthur said quietly to Frank. "I thought you'd do the right thing." "We needed help," Frank muttered. "It wasn't like we used it for vacations." "You used it for anything but what it was intended for," Arthur growled. "That's still theft." Hannah's breath shook in her chest. Her throat burned. She had spent 3 years believing she wasn't smart, wasn't capable, and now she understood why. It had been easier for her parents to destroy her confidence than admit they stole her future. Later that night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, running through every conversation she had ever had with her parents about school. Every time she had mentioned her dreams, they had dismissed them. Every time she talked about college, they had shut her down. It all made sense now. They weren't being practical or protective. They were covering their tracks. She got up and turned on her desk lamp. She opened her notebook and began making a list. Everything she had paid for out of pocket, every sacrifice she had made, every lie she had been told. By the time the sun rose, she had decided what to do. She wasn't going to stay silent. She was going to expose everything. Over the next few days, Arthur brought in his lawyer to go over the details of the fund. Hannah sat in stunned silence during their meeting when the lawyer shared even more devastating news. Not only was the original $15,000 spent, the attorney explained, but your parents also used your name to take out loans tied to the fund's projected value. Loans? Hannah asked, eyes wide. Yes, the lawyer replied grimly. Nearly $8,000 in debt has been registered under your name, without your consent. That's identity theft. Hannah's hands trembled as she picked up the documents. Her forged signature stared back at her from the page. Can they do that? She whispered. Not legally, the lawyer said. But they did it. And you have every right to press charges. Arthur placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. I'll support you no matter what, he said. But first, let's get your education back on track. Hannah nodded. She had no idea how she was still holding herself together. What made it worse was learning what her parents had told the rest of the family. Arthur had begun calling relatives to verify the story, and what he uncovered made Hannah feel sick. They've been telling people you dropped out of high school, he said. That you weren't interested in school and preferred working at the factory. Hannah's mouth dropped open. That's not true. I finished high school with decent grades. I just couldn't afford college. They lied over and over, Arthur said. To protect themselves. And to destroy your reputation. As the truth came out, Arthur discovered even more betrayal. Your Uncle Paul offered to help with college expenses 2 years ago, he said one afternoon. He told me your mom said you weren't interested in education and had turned down the offer. Hannah's chest tightened. I never even knew he offered. She never told me. Arthur nodded. They blocked every chance you had. They shaped how everyone saw you so that no one would ever ask questions. Hannah sank into the couch, her head in her hands. Her own parents had carefully built a story of failure around her, to cover their theft. But now that story was falling apart, and she was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. Hannah made a decision. She would wait until Christmas Eve when the entire family would gather at their house, just like they did every year. That would be the moment she told them everything, about the stolen fund, the forged loans, the lies, and the truth. Arthur was hesitant. Are you sure you want to do this in front of everyone? He asked. It's going to be a dramatic scene. Good, Hannah said, her eyes steady. They deserve to hear it all. And my parents need to face the consequences. She spent the next few weeks collecting every document. Bank records, transcripts, tuition receipts, work schedules, and letters from her professors. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, she was ready. The evening started like any other holiday dinner. The living room was filled with laughter, smells of baked ham and sweet potatoes, and the sound of Christmas music playing softly. But inside, Hannah was calm and focused. She had her folder of documents in her bedroom, waiting. She watched her parents move through the room, laughing and chatting, completely unaware of what was coming. Her cousin Brian was there as usual, talking about his university internship. Aunt Mary asked Linda, "How's Hannah doing these days?" "She's happy working at the factory," Linda replied with a bright smile. "She's not really interested in school." Hannah took a deep breath. It was time. She stood up from the table. "Actually," she said, her voice strong, "I have something important to share." The room grew quiet. Forks paused midair. Eyes turned toward Hannah. Linda's smile dropped instantly. Frank stiffened. "What's going on?" Aunt Mary asked gently. Hannah stepped forward. "I found out 3 weeks ago that my grandfather gave my parents $15,000 3 years ago. Money meant for my education." Gasps filled the room. But I never saw a cent of it. I've been working double shifts at West Lane Manufacturing to pay for community college. I've been going to school in secret, working full-time, studying part-time. I have a 3.8 GPA. Brian sat up straight. You're in college? I have been. For 3 years. Hannah turned and walked to her room. She came back with a thick folder and placed it on the table. Here's everything you need to see. One by one, the family members leaned forward to look. There were work schedules, tuition receipts, report cards, and professor letters. Aunt Beverly whispered, she wasn't lying. Uncle Paul turned to Linda. You told me she wasn't interested in school. That she dropped out. Hannah wasn't done. There's more, she said. She pulled out another set of papers. These are loan documents taken out in my name. I didn't sign them. My parents forged my signature. There's $8,000 in debt sitting on my credit right now. The room went silent. Frank and Linda looked frozen. Uncle Paul snatched one of the documents. This is a felony. You committed identity theft against your daughter. We were going to pay it back, Linda said, her voice shaking. We didn't mean for it to go this far. You meant exactly for it to go this far, Hannah replied. Her voice was calm, but the pain behind it was heavy. You told everyone I was lazy. You convinced me I wasn't smart enough. You lied to our entire family to cover up what you did. And while I worked myself sick, you watched me suffer without saying a word. Arthur stood up. I trusted you, he said to Frank, his face red with rage. I gave you that money because I thought you'd support your daughter. Instead, you used it for yourself and tried to erase her future. You destroyed her confidence, Aunt Mary added angrily. We believed you. Uncle Paul looked at Hannah. What are you going to do now? Hannah took a breath. I already filed a police report. Identity theft. Fraud. Charges are being processed. Chaos broke out across the room. Voices were raised. Chairs pushed back. Frank and Linda tried to explain, but no one wanted to hear it. They spent years tearing her down, Brian said quietly, shaking his head. I feel awful for believing them. We all do, Aunt Beverly added. But now we know. Arthur stood tall beside Hannah. She's not alone anymore. Uncle Paul turned to his wife. We need to help her. Slowly, family members began offering support. Not just money but encouragement. A place to stay. A connection at the university. For the first time in her life, Hannah saw her family for what they really were. And she finally saw herself clearly too. Not weak. Not stupid. But strong. Frank tried one last time. We'll pay it back, he said. Every penny. Arthur stared at him. You'll pay it back because the court will make you. But you'll never undo what you did to her. Hannah's eyes met her father's. You broke something in me. But you don't get to break the rest of my life. The room fell quiet again, but it wasn't the silence of shock anymore. It was the silence of respect. Respect for Hannah. She had exposed the truth with dignity and courage. She had fought through years of doubt and lies and still managed to rise. The family dinner was ruined. The holiday was ruined. But something else was finally beginning. A new beginning, for Hannah. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Frank and Linda were officially charged. The court ordered restitution and placed a lien on their house. They were forced to sell it to repay the stolen money and the illegal loans. Arthur helped Hannah wipe the fraudulent debt from her record. The lawyer assured her it would not affect her credit long term. But the real damage was emotional. Frank and Linda tried calling. They tried apologizing. Hannah didn't pick up. Arthur supported her every step of the way. So did the rest of the family. Uncle Paul even helped her apply for scholarships and student grants. She got into the University of Arkansas. And this time she walked in with her head held high. 2 years later, Hannah was thriving. She had transferred from community college and was now pursuing a pre-med degree. She had new friends. A steady part-time job that didn't drain her spirit. And most importantly, she had confidence. She no longer questioned her intelligence. She knew her worth. She even volunteered at the hospital on weekends, just to get early experience in the medical field. Sometimes when she walked past the old factory where she used to work long shifts, she would pause and think. Not about the pain but about how far she'd come. Everything they tried to keep from her, she had reclaimed. Christmas Eve came around again. This year the dinner was held at Aunt Mary's house. Frank and Linda weren't invited. Arthur sat beside Hannah, proud as ever. Cousin Brian was now one of her biggest supporters. "I still think about what you said last year," he told her. "That took guts. You inspired me." Uncle Paul raised a toast during dinner. "To Hannah. For showing us what real strength looks like." The family cheered. Hannah smiled, humbled but grateful. She didn't need revenge anymore. The truth had already done what it was meant to do. And Hannah? She was finally free. After dinner, Arthur handed her a small gift box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a tiny charm, a pair of wings. "For how high you've flown," he said with tears in his eyes. Hannah hugged him tightly. "You never stopped believing in me," she whispered. "And now the world won't either," he replied. That night, Hannah sat outside under the stars, wearing her necklace and thinking about her journey. She had walked through fire and come out stronger, wiser, and ready for anything. This was just the beginning. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. Her story was no longer defined by lies, but by resilience. Hannah Thompson was no longer the quiet, broken girl working double shifts and hiding in shadows. She was a future doctor, fighter, a woman who took her life back. And in the silence of the evening, with the stars above and her family's love finally surrounding her, she smiled. Because the truth didn't just set her free. It gave her wings. Moral lesson. Even when those closest to you try to bury your potential, the truth, once uncovered, can break every chain. Your worth is not decided by their lies, but by your determination to rise. Remember to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe to this channel.